separated into two sections. First section is war, and then the next section is on self-defense.
I see. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. All right. Well, let's go for it. So this section, yeah, we'll, as Luke just said, we'll just be focusing on war first. And these, as you can see, these are the quotes from Scripture that the church fathers would quote the most often on this subject, although there are plenty of others. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. This is from the Old Testament, prophet Isaiah. This was a very popular one. And this one's neglected by a lot of people today, even people that are in David Berceau's camp, they say non-resistant. People don't really quote this one too terribly often, but it's a very effective prophecy about the new covenant that we have here from Isaiah. He says, "And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords in." And literally here, beat just means to just like stab, stab it. Think about like stabbing it into hay, just putting it aside, putting it up. They shall put their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, this does not have to do with only the priests, neither shall the priests learn war anymore, but this is concerning everybody Isaiah is talking about. This is the whole body of believers in the new covenant. This is not something that's only for the priests. This is for even the laity.
Yeah, the
Likewise,
Orthodox would say that well, the priests can't engage in war anymore, but all the regular Christians do still engage war. That's what they officially teach in the Orthodox Church. But that's not what the early church said. Get ready to see what they say about all Christians.
before we get to that, though, we'll read a section from Luke here. Luke writes, "And the soldiers likewise demanded of him, saying, And what shall we do? And he," this is John the Baptist, if you guys remember, "John the Baptist said unto them, Do violence to no man, neither accuse any falsely, and be content with your wages." Now, in fairness, we should bring up Luke. There is some discrepancy here on the
No,
word
many
wages.
translations say do violence to no man. King James Bible says do violence to no man.
Right.
But it just comes from the Greek word to shake somebody violently. And some people think that means just to threaten them or intimidate them. Like if you look it up in the Greek, I think those will be the first words that come up when defining that word. It's to threaten, to intimidate. And they say sometimes it can mean to extort someone, like try to steal money from them. But the fact is, if you just take it literally, which the early church always does, then it just means don't be violent with somebody. Don't shake somebody. Don't be threatening. Don't be intimidating. This is something that you would never expect to hear a soldier would be told. A soldier's job is to go in and break up riots and mobs and use violence to get control and peace of a situation. But to tell a soldier, you're not allowed to threaten people anymore, you're not allowed to be intimidating, it's basically like saying don't even be a soldier anymore. Now somebody might think, well, how can they be a soldier then? Like, don't they just have to resign? But back then, guys, soldiers were kind of like, they weren't just people who would have to fight people. They were also just given regular jobs of like building roads. Everybody knows that was the most common job that Roman soldiers were always involved in. The Romans were really hardcore about building roads everywhere, so you'd always find them doing that. They were not always fighting people, so it was possible to still be in active service, in military duty, without ever hurting anybody. And it's just that the Christians were told, if you're ever told to hurt anybody or kill anybody, you have to say no. You have to say, I can't do that.
Well, certainly, if you can't be intimidating, you most definitely can't actually go around attacking people physically.
Right, or else
But
John the Baptist is saying, I mean, you can stab them, just not in an intimidating way, not in a threatening way. Just like forego the warning and just get right to the stabbing.
yeah,
Ridiculous. No, he's giving a very high standard for the soldiers. And similarly, what he says to the tax collectors is that they're not allowed to take anything beyond what was allotted to them to collect for the taxes. And everybody knows the tax collectors regularly took way more than had been designated as the tax, and that was how they made their entire profit. So we was saying you basically can't be tax collectors anymore. There's no profit anymore.
Christ says in Matthew's gospel, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
Mhm.
So we are to be peacemakers. We're not to be warmongers. We're not to be participating in wars. We should be actively trying to end wars if possible.
Yep. You won't find any places in the New Testament or any times in the early church for the first 300 years where any Christians were using violence to intimidate or attack their enemies or take revenge or fight in any wars. Nothing of the sort. It's not in the Bible and it's not in church history. Not until after Constantine. And by the way, there is only one instance of anybody using a sword. One of Jesus' disciples using a sword, and it's Peter when he drew a sword to defend Jesus. Jesus told him to put that sword back in its sheath. And Ambrose says, thus he disarmed all men. And he
Yep.
did not consider that to be something Christians are allowed to do. And you can notice Peter never used it again. Jesus only let him do it, he says, so that he'd be numbered with transgressors. And he was speaking spiritually to Peter, but Peter took it literally that they needed to take physical swords. And then when he used it, Jesus told him, put it away. So we don't use weapons. And that's how the early church all universally accepted it. So get ready for these quotes. Nolan, I'm going to shut up and you just take it away.
Yes, and obviously, guys, there are more that we can read here. We'll actually read some more shortly here, in this spot whenever we get on self-defense. And obviously, some of these can also apply to war as well, obviously. So there's obviously more in the New Testament here, but we'll go ahead and jump right in. We're starting off with the Didache, which is going to be pretty much quoting the same thing that Jesus says, word for word here. And of these sayings, the teaching is this. So this is the teaching that they had received from Christ. He says, bless those who curse you and pray for your enemies and fast persecute you. For what reward is there for loving those who love you? Do not the Gentiles do the same? But love those who hate you, and you shall not have an enemy. Abstain from fleshly and worldly lusts. If someone strikes your right cheek, turn to him the other also, and you shall be perfect. So, and if you recall at the, I know they're, this is the Didache that we're quoting here, but obviously they're referring to that same section from Matthew. And if you recall Matthew's conclusion here at this section, when Jesus is speaking, he says, and you shall be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So this is the standard for the Christian. Someone strikes your right cheek, turn to him the other also. So clearly, how could we participate in any war if this is a principle that we Christians adhere to? And how could any Christian be involved in government in the waging of war? Think about if a Christian were truly to become a king, they would be so limited in the things that they would be able to do. They wouldn't be able to fight back against a conquering force, but they would have to abide by this principle. Anyway, go back to the main point here. We continue on. We've got Justin Martyr now. And Justin Martyr says, we who hated and destroyed one another, he's referring to the Gentiles here who have recently converted to Christianity, how they were all involved in war and just all these wicked things, all this destruction, this violence. He says, and on account of their different manners would not live with men of a different tribe. Now, since the coming of Christ, live familiarly with them and pray for our enemies and endeavor to persuade those who hate us unjustly to live conformably to the good precepts of Christ, to the end that they may become partakers with us of the same joyful hope of a reward from God, who is the ruler of all. And so, yeah, I mean, this quote should be, plain enough, obvious enough. We who hated and destroyed one another. That's past tense. We're not doing that anymore. We're not being tribal anymore. Christians are not tribal, um, which is something that's always been a part of human history, tribalism and the like. And Christians don't engage in that anymore. If a man is a Christian, regardless to what race he belongs to, uh, the only thing that is significant to the Christian is the fact a fellow Christian. And
Oh,
there's more
you
that I
cut
could
out for
say
a
on.
second there, Nolan.
Yeah, the headphones I think are, they keep saying battery low. I guess it's cutting out my microphone whenever I'm speaking.
Yep, only for a second.
There's
If it does it, just repeat yourself for that part.
Well, I was just saying, there's more that I could say on this subject. It doesn't really have too much to do with the subject of war, though, concerning the tribalism. But the point is, guys, is just that Justin is talking about things that we former Gentiles had engaged in that we do not engage in anymore whenever we become a Christian, mainly tribalism and participation in war and hating other people. We can go on and continue here. This is another quote that we have from Justin Martyr. He says, "We who formerly used to murder one another do not only now refrain from making war upon our enemies, but also that we may not lie nor deceive our examiners, willingly die confessing Christ." So his point here at the end is just, we don't even protect ourselves. We never protect ourselves. We willingly die. We were people that formerly used to be violent and to attack other people, but now we're very willingly letting ourselves be slaughtered out here. We have, um, we got Marcus Aurelius. You got a quote from Marcus Aurelius here?
Talking about
Luke?
the war, remember?
Yeah. So I see that you've got this little note here before the quote begins for everybody. It just reads as follows. This is not part of the quote. "The following was written by a pagan Roman emperor." Again, this is Marcus Aurelius, who wrote this here. It's preserved by a few different church fathers, mainly, what is it, Luke? Tertullian and Eusebius, is that right?
Multiple. Justin Martyr actually includes it in his writings.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember that now. It's in the at the end of the first apology, right?
Yep. There are a bunch of other sources, but this is a real letter written by an emperor, guys. Yeah, I know we
Yeah.
read the church fathers a lot, but you're getting a lot of good historical knowledge here. And the emperors talked about the Christians, so listen to this letter from an emperor talking about the Christians.
Yes, and he's talking specifically about a time that he was engaged in a battle, and he was, as it says here, his experience with professing Christian soldiers. So he had some soldiers under him in his army who were identifying as Christians. They were Christians, and they refused to fight, but instead they wanted to offer prayers instead of fighting the enemy. And so this is the account that he gives. "The Emperor Caesar Marcus Aurelius, to the people of Rome and to the sacred Senate, I was surrounded by the enemy, and the enemy being at hand, there was close on us a mass of a mixed multitude of 977,000 men, which indeed we saw. Having then examined my own position and my host with respect to the enemy, I quickly betook myself to prayer to the gods of my country. But being disregarded by them, I summoned those who among us go by the name of Christians." So he's saying here, I realized that I was in a losing battle. Things were not going well. I decided to pray to the pagan gods. They completely disregarded me. Uh, the phone didn't pick up, so I went to the last resort. There were some people in my army who were Christians, and without any other options to go to, I went to them to see what they could do. He continues, "And having made inquiry, I discovered a great number and a vast host of them, and raged against them, which was by no means becoming, for afterwards I learned their power." So he's saying, I was raging against them when I was first speaking to them. I realized afterwards now that was totally out of line because these guys apparently have some power. So he says, "Wherefore they began the battle not by preparing weapons, nor arms, nor bugles, for such preparation is hateful to them, to the Christians, on account of the God they bear about in their conscience." So this is not coming just from some personal practice of theirs, but he's saying not only is this a practice that's observed by them, but they say that it's on account of God that they adhere to this precept. He continues, therefore, it is probable that those whom we suppose to be atheists, he's referring to the Christians. The Christians were actually accused of being atheists, if you can imagine. That was the charge that we were actually charged with whenever we were killed by the Roman government, our forefathers. We weren't convicted of being Christians so much as we were convicted of being atheists because we denied the other gods that exist, only accepting just the one God. And so he continues here saying, have God as their ruling power entrenched in their conscience. For having cast themselves on the ground, they prayed not only for me, but also for the whole army as it stood, that they might be delivered from third, uh, the present thirst and famine. For during 5 days we had got no water because there was none. For we were in the heart of Germany and the enemy's territory. And simultaneously, with their casting themselves on the ground and praying to God, a God of whom I am ignorant, water poured from upon us, most refreshingly cool, but upon the enemies of Rome, a withering hail. So he's saying here, look, we had been starving, we'd been so thirsty, we had nothing to drink for 5 days. He says here during this battle, we were in the heart of Germany fighting the Germans, and we were just completely a fish out of water, no water. So the true fish, the Christians, he says here, they prayed for water, and the Roman soldiers, they received something that was cool. He says, upon us, most refreshingly cool, something that rejuvenated them. But he says, it was not so, though, for the enemies of Rome. They experienced not a refreshing cool, but a withering hail, a storm. And he continues saying, and immediately we recognize the presence of God following on the prayer, a God unconquerable and indestructible. Founding upon this, then, let us pardon such as our Christians, lest they pray for and obtain such a weapon against ourselves. So he's saying, look, these guys are clearly pretty strong. They just took out our enemy. If we are going to be fighting them, who's to say that they don't turn this awesome power that they have around on us and we get taken out? So he's kind of trying to preserve himself here. Like, this doesn't seem so safe anymore to be attacking these guys. So he continues on here. He says, and I counsel that no such person be accused on the ground of his being a Christian. But if anyone be found laying to the charge of a Christian that he is a Christian, I desire that it be made manifest that he who is accused as a Christian and acknowledge that he is one is accused of nothing else than only this, that he is a Christian. But that who arraigns him be burned alive. So he's flipping the punishment. He's saying, don't attack the Christians. If they're guilty of being a Christian, that's the only thing that they're guilty of being a Christian. But the one who goes after the Christians, let them be burned alive. He says, and I further desire that he who is entrusted with the government of the province shall not compel the Christian who confesses and certifies such a matter to retract, neither shall he commit him. And I desire that these things be confirmed by a decree of the Senate. And I command this my edict to be published in the Forum of Trajan, in order that it may be read. The prefect, Vitracius Polio, will see that it be transmitted to all the provinces round about, and that no one who wishes to make use of and that no one who wishes to make use of or to possess it be hindered. It cut out again. He's basically just saying here at the end, no one should be hindered from obtaining a copy of the document that I'm now publishing here. He's like, I want everyone to freely have a copy of what I've just written here. That's all he's saying. So big long quote. This is again from Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was not a Christian, though he was one of like the most highly respected Roman emperors. Even the Christians speak very fondly of him. He did begin his rule by persecuting Christians, but after this battle occurred, he took a liking to the Christians, and as you can see, put an end to the persecutions for as long as he was emperor. After
Yes.
he was emperor,
He
it
also became a lot more philosophical. I mean, you guys have probably heard of Marcus Aurelius quotes. I used to see them when I was on Facebook. They just come up randomly. He's very philosophical, probably one of the most out of all the emperors. But part of it is because of this, just that he had some acquaintance with Christianity, and he did become a much more gentle emperor. He's one of the least warmongering out of all the emperors. He actually changed quite a bit after this, and he was, as you can see, uh, blessed because he, unlike his other emperor counterparts, his predecessors, became gentle toward the Christians, but it was for a very short amount of time. Each emperor didn't reign for very long. They always ended up dying suddenly, and somebody would take over after him. And he had just followed a long succession of extremely violent, aggressive emperors who hated the Christians. But it's still a nice little chapter in history, if brief.
Yep. We can continue on here if there's
Yeah.
nothing else that we want to talk about this.
Yep, it was about
I think we covered
160
most of it.
AD.
Yep.
Yep, you just read away, Nolan.
All right.
So that they don't get stuck in the middle of the quote. Let's just read the whole quote and then we'll go over the quote again after we've read it.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So again, we return to Justin Martyr here. The reason Marcus Aurelius is sandwiched in between Justin Martyr here and Justin Martyr there, as we pointed out earlier, is that Justin Martyr is one of the earliest people that we have that preserved this letter for us, or this decree, I guess. But Justin Martyr also states in a separate work, we who were filled with war and mutual slaughter and every wickedness have each through the whole earth changed our warlike weapons, our swords into plowshares, and our spears into implements of tillage. And we cultivate piety, righteousness, philanthropy, faith, and hope, which we have from the Father himself, through him who was crucified. So again, we see Isaiah being quoted here once again. This is the first of many times that Isaiah's prophecy about the Christians is quoted by the church fathers, and he says what we've replaced this wickedness with. Another quote that we could use here, Luke, is when Paul says he's talking about the weapons of our warfare. That's a good one too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do wage war, guys, just not physically. We don't kill
Yeah,
people.
we can continue on. Now that was all that we had from Justin Martyr here, and we move on to a single quote here from Irenaeus. He says, no new covenant was given, but they used the Mosaic law until the coming of the Lord. But from the Lord's advent, the new covenant, which brings back peace, and the law which gives life, has gone forth over the whole earth, as the prophet said, for out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall rebuke many people, and they shall break down their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And they shall no longer learn to fight. The law of liberty caused such a change in the state of things that these nations did form the swords and war lances into plowshares and changed them into pruning hooks for reaping the corn. That is, into instruments used for peaceful purposes, and that they are now unaccustomed to fighting, but when smitten, also offer the other cheek. I think it's plain enough. Is there anything that you want to say on that, Luke?
Yep, keep going. I'm working on other stuff while you're working.
All right, very well. Athenagoras, we're at now. He says, for when they know that we cannot endure even to see a man put to death, though justly, who of them can accuse us of murder or cannibalism? But we, deeming that to see a man put to death is much the same as killing him, have abjured such spectacles. How then, when we do not even look on, lest we should contract guilt and pollution, can we put people to death? So Athenagoras is pointing out here at the very beginning, if this is confusing at all, he's saying it is just that the government. So here we have again this duality here. You don't want to swing in the pendulum like too far one way or the other. though Christians cannot participate in the government, as I've said before, the government does carry out a just purpose that God wills for it to carry out, which is the punishment of evildoers and keeping some semblance of peace on earth in this time. And so he's saying here, just notice though justly, it's a qualifying statement. He is saying it is just that the government is putting people to death, criminals to death. Yet, nevertheless, even though they are fulfilling their function, we don't want to go out there and look at the public display of the execution of the criminals. We can't endure seeing anyone put to death, even a man who actually deserves it, a real criminal. And he's bringing this up. It's a common fact that is known about Christians that he's bringing up. And then he's also bringing a common accusation against Christians directly after here. There was a slander, a rumor that the Christians were secretly, whenever they would meet together in private, were engaging in acts of murder or cannibalism. The cannibalism, no doubt, had to do with the fact that, we devour, we eat the flesh of Christ, and we drink the blood of Christ. And no doubt somebody heard something like that. Maybe they overheard it. And that's how that rumor began, from a misinterpretation. So Christians were really thought of as like these horrible monsters that would like snatch babies and kill them, murder them, or would engage in cannibalism together. People were really freaked out by Christians. But then at the same time, they knew that Christians wouldn't like watching people put to death, that that's something that they would shy away from. So Athenagoras' point here is like, how can these two things exist at the same time? These two claims about Christians. Or since, oh, since
All
we
right.
wish,
Whoever
My
did
bad.
it, no more.
That wasn't
since
on
we-
purpose.
All
It's
right,
okay.
keep going.
My headset keeps cutting out. Since we wish the men power off.
Did you lose power, Nolan?
Phone. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
No.
I'm gonna have to rejoin with.
He'll come right back. I would read through them, but my throat is
Yeah,
in
look,
stark.
I had to switch because I realized that, okay, if I were to go to work, I would have to take my phone with me, and my phone is the only reason my computer can have internet because I can't plug it into the Wi-Fi box, so it's weird,
I get it.
but we got it.
Well, are you saying not able to record tonight?
I'm able because I have a second phone.
Oh, well,
I just
that's
had to
cool.
switch.
Great. Nice. That's very helpful.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, we just won't have it on the screen, but you can keep reading, Nolan. It's still being recorded.
Okay, let me. I can put the quotes if you guys need the quotes. I can put them into the chat.
Yeah, you just read through the whole quote and then commentate on it. That way they can hear the whole quote in context.
Okay, very well. We were just reading the second to last one from Clement of Alexandria here. I'm just going to restart real quick since it cut out like halfway through the first sentence. He says, "For we do not train our women like Amazons to manliness and war, since we wish the men even to be peaceable. I hear that the Samaritan women practice war no less than the men, and the women of the Sacae, besides, who shoot backwards, feigning flight as well as the men. I am aware, too, that the women near Iberia practice many work and toil, not refraining from their tasks, even though near their delivery. But even in the very struggle of her pains, the woman, on being delivered, taking up the infant, carries it home. So that last part just has to do with women being involved too much with work and being crazy. It's kind of funny. But the first part here is more what applies to us and what we're talking about here concerning the Amazons, if you guys have heard of them. I think Wonder Woman, the comic book character, is Amazonian, in the mythical sense. But he's talking about how the Amazons are known not only for their men to be trained in war, which was standard across all nations, but that they uniquely trained their women as well. And he says, yeah, this is crazy. And he says, not only do we not train our women like the Amazons, but we even command the men to be peaceable as well. And he continues here. We got the last quote now from Clement of Alexandria. He says, above all, Christians are not allowed to correct with violence the delinquencies of sins. For it is not those that abstain from wickedness, from compulsion, but those that abstain from choice that God crowns. It is impossible for a man to be steadily good except by his own choice. For he that is made good reveals, for he that is made good by compulsion of another is not good. For he is not what he is by his own choice. For it is the freedom of each one that makes true goodness and reveals real wickedness. Whence through these dispositions God contrived to make his own disposition manifest. So, as for the beginning here, he's saying, above all, Christians are not allowed to correct with violence the delinquencies of sins. We cannot be attacking other people. Christ only says, cut them off, don't talk to them, don't communicate with them, have nothing to do with them, treat them like a tax collector. That's what he says. But he doesn't give us any permission whatsoever to go attacking people. And he talks about here as well. This is a good point that many of us have pointed out before. This doesn't so much have to do with what we're talking about. It kind of does, but he's just saying, for it is not those that abstain from wickedness, from compulsion, but those that abstain from choice that God crowns. So the point here as it relates to not engaging in violence, Clement is just saying that we should not be attacking people and commanding them to be good under threat of violence. They should choose to be good. And if they don't choose to be good, so much for them. But if they choose to be good of their own will, God will truly crown that person. He's not going to crown a person that is good under under threat of violence, and that's just very obvious. Next, that we conclude now from Clement of Alexandria. We're there at the end of the 100s here. We're going into Tertullian, who starts to creep into the 200s now. And Tertullian says the following. He says, but now inquiry is made about this point, whether a believer may turn himself unto military service, and whether the military may be admitted unto the faith, even the rank and file, or each inferior grade, to whom there is no necessity for taking part in sacrifices or capital punishments. But how will a Christian man war? Nay, how will he serve even in peace without a sword, which the Lord has taken away? For albeit soldiers had come unto John and had received the formula of their rule, albeit likewise a centurion had believed, still the Lord afterward, in disarming Peter, disarmed every soldier. No dress is lawful among us if assigned to any unlawful action. So people say, well, are we allowed to engage in the military? And he says, how is that even possible? How can you be a Christian? It'd be like oxymoronic. He says, let me go back here. He says,
Christians do not take part in sacrifices or capital punishments. The soldiers were commanded to regularly participate in sacrifices to the gods, to the emperor, and they did this as a superstition because they thought it would improve their odds in battle. So it was a very serious part to Roman soldiers and to just all Romans in general, that the soldiers were doing their part in sacrificing to the gods. Because if they turned their nose up at this, they could potentially, this is in the minds of the Romans, I mean, they could potentially be ticking off the Roman gods and thereby hurling Rome into defeat and everything that would come with that. So it was looked at as like, this is why it was treated so severely by the Romans. The fact that their own soldiers now, I mean, not only the citizens were doing this, they were refusing to participate in the sacrifices to the gods, but now the soldiers aren't doing that. And so this was one of the easy ways, typically, for the government to weed out the Christians from people who weren't Christians. They would just randomly say to the soldiers, all right, guys, line up. You guys are going to have to each give a sacrifice to the gods. And obviously the Christians couldn't do that, so they were pointed out and ousted from hiding. And also they weren't allowed to participate in capital punishments. They couldn't kill people. He continues where he says, but how will a Christian man war? So that's just the end of the question right there. How can a Christian man go to war? And he says, wait, hold on a second. He says, wait. Let's say that the army isn't engaging in war. He says, okay, how will he serve in peace then? Without a sword, which the Lord has taken away. The soldiers need to be ready. They have to have the sword ready to go to war at any time. No telling when the enemy might appear and you might be called into action. So he's just pointing out here just like how impossible this is. And as far as, and also here at the end, he says, still the Lord afterward, referring to Christ, in disarming Peter, disarmed every soldier. So that's that quote that Luke was referring to earlier. I think a couple other writers say the same thing as well.
Yep,
But
they use that same phrase. They do it. They use the same phrase that Jesus disarmed every man.
Yep.
Yep.
Tertullian continues, we got another quote from him here. He says, I think we must first inquire whether warfare is proper at all for Christians. What sense is there in discussing the merely accidental when that on which it rests is to be condemned? Do we believe it lawful for a man? Do we believe it lawful for a human oath to be superadded to one divine? For a man to come under promise to another master after Christ and to abjure father, mother, and all nearest kinsfolk, whom even the law has commanded us to honor and love next to God himself, to whom the gospel too, holding them only on of less account than Christ, has in like manner rendered honor? Shall it be held lawful to make an occupation of the sword when the Lord proclaims that he who uses the sword shall perish by the sword? And shall the Son of Peace take part in the battle when it does not become him even to sue at law? So again, Tertullian likes to kind of engage in this whenever he's talking about these things. It's been pointed out before, like Tertullian has kind of an interesting way of pointing out problems and things that Christians can't do. He typically likes to take the role of like just asking questions and be like, what are you going to do in this scenario? How is this possible? Whereas some of the others might just say, you're not allowed to do this. Don't do it. Do not do this. Whereas Tertullian says, all right, let's walk through the example here. Let's hypothetically look at this. So what are you going to do in this scenario? How is this even possible? It's not possible. So obviously then you can't be in the military. He's getting at. He's like, it just doesn't work. Think about all the different scenarios that could pop up. Tertullian is willing to engage these questions and sort of like humor them and just point out all the little ways that this whole thing just wouldn't work, rather than just giving a flat, statement that no, you can't be in military. It's very this very last sentence here at the end of the quote that we just read is very hitting, where he says, "And shall the Son of Peace take part in the battle when it does not become him even to sue at law?" If we can't sue people, well, all right, I'm not going to sue you, but I am going to cut your head off. I mean, that's crazy. So no, we don't engage in war. We've got another quote here from Tertullian, and this is the last one that we have from Tertullian here in this list. He says, "Of course, if faith comes later and finds any preoccupied with military service, their case is different, as in the instance of those whom John used to receive for baptism, and of those most faithful centurions. I mean, the centurion whom Christ approves, and the centurion whom Peter instructs. Yet at the same time, when a man has become a believer and faith has been sealed, there must be either an immediate abandonment of it, which has been the course with many, or all sorts of quibbling will have to be resorted to in order to avoid offending God. And that is not allowed even outside of military escape from punishment of sins or exemption from martyrdom."
I skip
I skipped it.
a
Yeah, I
line.
noticed. And that is not allowed even outside of military service. Or last of all, go back a second. He says, or last of all, for God, the fate must be endured which a citizen, faith has been no less ready to accept. Neither does military service hold out escape from punishment of sins or exemption from martyrdom. The main point here, though, is with this quote, guys, is just to say that he's talking about the case now where, well, what if you have somebody that's already in military service and they want to become a Christian? And he's saying here, look, their case is obviously different, but as far as people who have already been admitted into the faith, if they should then turn after having been baptized and becoming a Christian, should then enter into the military, they've got nothing to do with Christianity at that point. We'll read another quote that's along this exact same lines later from Hippolytus, but we'll continue on here now. Oh wait, no, you didn't. Did you have the one from Hippolytus, Luke?
Let me see.
I don't see it here in the war section. I'll just mention it. It basically just says Hippolytus, in his book called The Apostolic Tradition, he goes over a list of occupations that Christians are not allowed to be a part of. And he gets to military service, and he says two things. There are two different scenarios that can occur. He says, if you have somebody that is already in the military and wants to become a Christian, in order for them to qualify as becoming a catechumen and to eventually be baptized, they must agree never to take an oath, to offer sacrifices, and to not kill anybody if they're commanded to. The second scenario that he gives is what should happen if a person who is already a Christian goes to join the military. And he says in that instance, that person is immediately excommunicated. If they weren't yet baptized, they're no longer considered for baptism. If they've already been baptized, as I said, they're to be excommunicated. He says they have abandoned the faith. Okay.
I do have it right here, Nolan. If you want to read it. I'm sorry, I need to add that. I was copying and pasting from the dictionary, but unfortunately, Berceau did not make a complete list of quotes by any means, and he's admitted that. So sometimes we got to fill in what's lacking in his quotes. You want to read this, Nolan?
Yeah, post it.
All right.
Post it in the chat.
Alrighty. I'll just separate it into two bulk messages. So he says, here, you read it, Nolan. You want to read it? Anybody want to read it?
If you can post it.
I did. I posted it in general. I'll also post it
in
chat.
general. Okay, you could post it in the chat. he says, "You want me? What is this
Here.
first part?" I'm gonna read
This
this. The second part. This is the quote. He says, "A military man in authority must not execute men. If he is ordered, he must not carry it out, nor must he take military oath. If he refuses, he shall be rejected. If someone is a military governor or the ruler of a city who that's where is I remember the catechumen, it's a little bit after this. The catechumen or faithful who wants to become a soldier is to be rejected, for he has despised God. So yeah, that's what he has to say on that subject. And
and
that's Hippolytus.
the thing he's being refused for is even getting to hear any teaching from
Yeah.
the Christians. It's not that
Yeah.
it's not like he's going to be kicked out of the church after he was baptized. No, we're talking about somebody even being considered for baptism. They're saying if he wants to be a soldier, then kick him out. He's not going to be a catechumen anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
And this is consistent.
Next.
There are no exceptions to this in the early church.
Right. Yeah, it's across the board. Total unanimity. My gosh.
Unanimity. Guys,
Yeah.
be on the alert. We warn you repeatedly, and so we warn you again. There are evil servants of Satan, evil apologists who wish to sow confusion into people and introduce the idea of there being lots of contradictions or variations within the early church on subjects, even about like war. And they will put forward quotes from the early Christians that are taken completely out of context. And we're just warning you now, be on the alert. I'm aware of them. If you are going to bring any or if you've seen any, I guarantee you I've most likely seen it. I've gotten to hear all the crazy suggestions of contradictory statements in the early church fathers. So if you come across any, hopefully you will be able to see how it's taken out of context. But if you're concerned, if you think you have found a contradiction, then go ahead and bring it to us. But even then, even though I have all confidence that there is no contradiction, you're not going to find any exceptions to this teaching about war and self-defense in the first 300 years. Even so, would it not be ludicrous to suggest that one quote, one person contradicting all the rest should be taken as the rule? That would be ridiculous too. But the fact is, there's not even one, and that is a great testament to the early church's unity.
Exactly. All right, we've got our last quote here from Origen, and he says, "In the next place, Celsus urges us." Now, if anyone doesn't remember or doesn't know, Celsus was a pagan critic of Christianity. He had written a somewhat popular, it seems, criticism of Christianity, basically like trying to debunk it and stuff. And so Origen wrote this big work called Against Celsus, where he responds to every one of his points. Anyway, so he's quoting Celsus here. He says, "Celsus urges us to help the king with all our might and to labor with him in the maintenance of justice, to fight for him, and if he requires it, to fight under him or leading an army along with him." So this is what Celsus is encouraging, exhorting the Christians to do. And Origen says, to this, our answer is that we do, when occasion requires, give help to kings, and that, so to say, a divine help, putting on the whole armor of God. And this we do in obedience to the injunction of the apostle. He says, "I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority." He's quoting Paul's letter here to Timothy. And he says, "And the more anyone excels in piety, the more effective help that whatever is opposed to those who act righteously may be destroyed. And as we, by our prayers, vanquish all demons who stir up war and lead to the violation of oaths and disturb the peace, we in this way are much more helpful to the kings than those who go into the field to fight for them. And we do not take our part in public affairs when, along with righteous prayers, we join self-denying exercises and meditations, which teach us to despise pleasures and not to be led away by them. And none fight better for the king than we do. We do not indeed fight under him, although he require it, but we fight on his behalf, forming a special army, an army of piety, by offering our prayers to God. So he's saying this is the most worthwhile thing that a Christian can do for the king. And he appeals here to what Paul says. He says, I exhort all the Christians that they should be giving supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks for all men, including kings and all that are in authority. And he says it in a couple other spots as well. But I mean, this is the thing that Christians should be doing. We should be praying. We should be honoring the emperor. We should be praying for the emperor. Every time that Christians were brought forward to be killed, and during their trial, like if anyone's read or listened to the audiobook of the trial of Apollonius, the Christians would always, this would be always, as I was mentioning earlier, this was the big thing. It was like a betrayal to everybody that the Christians were refusing to engage in the sacrifices. They were refusing to engage in battle or public office. They weren't doing their part. They weren't doing their service to the state. And so they were seen as like enemies of mankind, which is what they were often called, enemies of mankind, because of this. That they were just like, in the eyes of the Romans, just total freaks, like at odds against them, an enemy in their own midst, an internal enemy that's working against them, refusing to participate in these things, actively fighting against them and trying to bring them down. That was the way that the Romans perceived the Christians. But the Christians would always respond to this, as Apollonius does in his trial, by saying, no, we're all for the emperor. We honor the emperor. We don't violate any of the laws of the land. We obey the laws that the emperor has put forward, and we in fact pray for the emperor. We may not be participating in your wars with actual weapons and killing people, and we may not be offering sacrifices to your gods, but we are praying, we are fasting for the security of the Roman Empire and for its success. And as Origen says here, that whatever is opposed to those who act righteously may be destroyed. And he says, this is a much more effective method of helping the emperor than actually going to war for him. He's saying we've done much more as Christians with our prayers than doing the things that you guys suggest that we do. And it's been pointed out before by others, but while there obviously was, of course, some battles every once in a while in Rome that they experienced, during those 300 years, those first 325 years of Christianity, Rome experienced a great deal of peace. There were like no major wars, pretty much. What do they call it, Luke? The Pax Romana, right?
Yeah, that's Marcus Aurelius's time. It was a period, like over 100 years of pretty good peace.
Yeah, so they had a good while of peace, and the Christians would point out, they'd say, look, you guys have experienced peace in a way that you haven't for a long time. And, it happened right when we appeared and we started praying. And of course, as it should be pointed out, immediately following Constantine's joining of the church and the state. Yeah. Suddenly,
tons of war.
All-out war. And the fall of the Roman Empire gets destroyed pretty quickly after that.
Also, I want to stress something that you always tend to stress, Nolan, and I'm going to steal it from you because you haven't said it yet. But in this quote, by the way, who are we just reading?
We're reading Origen from Against
Origen,
Celsus.
yes. Nolan, you always like to stress this point, but Origen here says look, those evildoers deserve to die. It's when we refuse to engage in war or to be violent, it's not that we're saying those evildoers don't deserve to be punished. Of course they do. It's just not our job to do it. Justice is not merely the dispensing of a punishment on someone who deserves it, but justice is the right person dispensing the judgment.
Yeah.
We're not all in that position to do it, but we do recognize that evildoers are worthy of judgment and death oftentimes. I mean, we would even say that about ourselves, that God has been merciful to us by sparing our lives and giving us a second chance and forgiving us of our sins. So that's one of the reasons we wouldn't want to kill others or judge them, because we're basically just asking for judgment to be done to ourselves. If you're going to have that judgmental attitude toward others where you want to just take vengeance on them and kill them, you're asking God to do that to you. Because if you're going to be unmerciful, you're asking God to be unmerciful. But again, we know that they deserve it, and we know that God, who is just and who is the avenger of wrongs, and Jesus, who is the true judge over mankind, will dispense true justice. But we human beings are not even capable of doing it really well, because so much of righteousness and evil actually starts in the heart. And if we were to be judges, we'd be guilty all the time of doing things, some making some evil judgments without even knowing it. This is even
Mhm.
true in households, that when God gives the authority to judge in households, parents have to pray to God to please give them wisdom so that they judge righteously in their homes. But even then, guys, even when you are dispensing judgment in your homes, it's just over your children. It's just over those who are allotted to your charge. God has not given you the authority to punish all evildoers. I mean, it's just your children. If you've got children in your house, you can see somebody else's child acting up, behaving very badly, being a brat and screaming and throwing a tantrum. But just because they're acting evil doesn't mean that you would be just in going and spanking their child. That would be evil for you to go and put your hands on somebody else's child. And it goes for all human beings. All human beings have not been entrusted to you, you being their Lord, you being their king, who has the authority to punish them for their evils. God has not entrusted that to you. He did do it at certain times. He has done that. The apostles had the authority and the power from God to strike somebody dead, as he did a few times in the New Testament. Paul struck some people dead, Peter did, and then Paul threatened to strike someone with sickness. But that's just not given to us, guys. So we are gentle, we are peacemakers, and we are sheep to the slaughter, and we hope to convert people to the faith, not end their life
Oh, and
in
they
sin.
dropped they they dropped Simon.
Yes, they did, didn't they? Peter and Paul. They did cause
Yeah.
somebody to die, an evil man, using
But
a
all
miraculous
those
power.
instances are where God clearly approved of it. They left it to God to go ahead and dispense that in every circumstance. Yeah, I was getting at that point earlier, Luke, whenever we were reading over what Athenagoras said. If you remember, he says, for when they know that we cannot endure even to see a man put to death, though justly. And so, yeah, that's something that I emphasize a lot. You don't want to pendulum swing too far in the other direction where it's like, oh, justice is bad then. That's not at all the case. Justice is very good. Christians anxiously look forward to the true justice, as Luke was saying, because God is the only one that can deliver the true and perfect justice. It's not an issue with justice, it's an issue with the mishandling of justice. Human beings are just not very good at it. So, at least in our current condition, I mean, we just don't know the hearts and the thoughts of men. We don't, we can't read people's thoughts, and we don't have all the evidence, all the facts. Things can be misunderstood, and I mean, just look at the United States alone. All the wrongful convictions. It's an ever-growing list every single day, and all the people that got off who were actually guilty. So it's not a sure thing. The government, you have to be balanced with it. And this is what the New Testament teaches, that we Christians do not participate in government. We don't get involved. We don't dispense justice. However, it is a good thing that the government's around. Paul says that it doesn't bear the sword in vain, but it serves the purpose. It serves God's purpose to keep some semblance of peace on earth for us, and the punishing of the criminal, the wicked person. So, yeah, just because something. I think the best way to look at it, guys, is just as Solomon says. Solomon says there's a time for everything. And so we Christians need to realize there's a time for peace and a time for punishment. And the time for punishment just isn't here yet. It's a time of peace right now. But those people who are being sinful, they are storing up wrath for themselves on the day of wrath. And they will receive wrath. So anyway, Luke, we are at the end now of the war section. We're going into the self-defense section. Dinner is done, so I am going to go ahead and eat. If anyone else wants to take over, I don't know if maybe, I know you want to rest your voice, Luke. Maybe Aramis would like to read?
He's
Or
in the
perhaps-
forest.
Oh, okay. How about Xavier? Maybe Xavier would like to read them.
Are you around, Xavier? Who is a good reader? Who has confidence in themselves? No, I think we'll wrap it up. We'll wrap it up with war, and we'll come back and do some self-defense quick.
That sounds good. No problem.
I'm going to bed early.
All right. Talk to you guys later. God
Yeah,
bless
you guys were edified.
We're ending.
I know it seems early, but I'm sorry, guys. I'm still sick. I wish we could go longer, but I don't think I can
No
read.
problem. I'm not gonna lie, it takes a lot off of mine because I was worried about how I'm gonna end it. But
Okay.
that makes it much simpler.
All right, guys. Well, you guys can stay